Welcome to our second of 2023 What It Takes session, and it being the What It Takes to Make the Most of AI. And AI has been a hot topic for the year, and you'll hear all about that. So welcome to our audience, staff and alumni. Welcome one and all. I'm Andrew Rogoyski from the Institute of AI, or to give it its full name, the Surrey Institute for People-Centered AI, people-centered being the important bit. Just to note, we will be recording this session. We will be recording it and sharing the session. So if you can't make all of it, you will be able to catch up. If you like what you hear, you want to make recommendations for other people to hear this, you should be able to do that. So we're going to hear from three academic speakers. I'm going to kick off a bit of a sort of reprise of the year. Then we'll hear from Benita, Oscar and Carla. We'll be all giving our own perspective on AI and how to make the most of it. And then we'll go to a Q&A session. So that's when we invite questions from you, the audience. And to record your questions, you'll note that your Teams has a Q&A tab. So go to that and start writing in your questions. And you can do that right from the get-go. So we will be looking at the Q&A as we go on. And then we'll come to those about halfway through the session. So, and I'll remind you to do that. So just as you're getting absorbed in the speakers' talks, do remember to ask and record your questions so we can come back to them. So thank you. So I'm going to kick off with a bit of a perspective. Today is a propitious day. It's the 30th of November. It was exactly a year ago today that OpenAI launched ChatGPT, which has caused a real growth in interest and awareness in AI. If we thought that AI was a fascinating topic beforehand, the last year has taught us somewhat differently. The OpenAI services went to 100 million users in 2 months. It broke all records for internet take-up. So huge interest. I think everyone over Christmas last year suddenly found a new hobby in the form of ChatGPT, or experimenting with it. And for the first time, it really put AI into the hands of pretty much anyone who has an internet browser or a mobile phone. And people started to get the idea, the real power of AI systems. And we can debate what that power is. Then we saw in March, we saw the first Microsoft paper called Sparks of AGI, early experiments with GPT-4. Which then sparked the Future of Life Institute's open letter. You may remember back earlier in the year, there was a letter that said we should put a pause on all large AI implementations and experimentations. It's running still with about 33,000, just over 33,000, nearly 34,000 signatures. So gained a lot of interest at the time. People arguing, should you stop AI? Can you stop AI? And so forth. Then what you saw over the year is the Silicon Valley hyperscalers, the likes of Microsoft, Google, and so on, really investing enormously in AI, really getting in on the act. Microsoft dropped 10 billion on OpenAI. Anthropic, as a competitor to OpenAI, has raised billions this year. Organizations like Hugging Face, a repository for AI models, has now valued at over 4.5 billion with investors from Amazon, Google, Salesforce, NVIDIA, and others. Even the startup community has done extraordinarily well. And the one that sticks in my mind was a French startup called Mistral, who have a very good, large language model now launched. 4 weeks after incorporating, they raised over 100 million euros. Which for anyone who's been a startup will appreciate quite how much that means. We've started to become much more aware about the abuse of AI. So from early things like Clarkesworld, the science fiction community that collected online submissions for books, science fiction books, they got completely overwhelmed with AI-generated books to the extent they had to turn off their feeds. Similarly, people like Amazon and Spotify were getting AI-generated books and music that actually were being sold through their platforms. They're completely generated by AI. Not necessarily a great read, but an interesting foray into that, clamped down shortly thereafter. We've seen legislation, we've seen litigation rise. We've seen organizations like the Authors Guild, representing over 8,000 authors, taking action against some of the AI providers. We've seen a class action against GitHub, Microsoft and OpenAI over code reuse. We've seen Getty suing Stability AI, including interesting reputational damage that they've asserted that their images are being used without their permission. They need to recognize copyright and so forth, but they also asserted that the images that were being put forward sometimes came out with grotesque imagery, and that was damaging to Getty's reputation. All unsettled at the moment. Even Google is being sued for misuse of personal information, which apparently has crept its way into some of the training data sets. Other people who've been affected, well, NVIDIA have done extraordinarily well this year. They've minted money as they are the world's leading manufacturer of hardware for AI, and keep beating all of their expectation in terms of revenue and profit, making billions and billions of dollars of profit every quarter. They are the go-to GPU, and people outbid. There's a black market in GPUs. They are the underpinning in terms of enabling your AI investments. Then we see the politicians get in on the act. At the beginning of the year, we were aware that the EU AI Act was pushing forward with the intention of getting it signed off by the end of this year. So they've got about 4 weeks left to go. In the autumn, we saw the UK government set the agenda for the Bletchley conference. Then, rather unkindly, the day before the Bletchley conference, the US announced the presidential executive order in which they announced their AI safety agency, which is going to be part of NIST, really setting the tone for we're going to check on these big AI models and try and constrain and control them. Then we had the Bletchley Declaration with 28 countries committing to AI safety, and the UK's own AI safety agency being announced. We've recently seen some watering down of the EU AI Act to the extent that there are now open letters circulating saying, please stick with it, because actually in the watered down version, you're kind of missing the opportunity to be the first to actually do something meaningful about the control of AI. And then last weekend, we saw the whole furore, the Silicon Valley sort of bubble of Sam Altman, the chief exec of OpenAI, getting fired for nobody quite knows why, then getting hired by Microsoft, then getting rehired by OpenAI, and the board reformatting, and rumors circulating about a system called Q-Star that was supposedly demonstrating higher values of cognition, being able to do unseen mathematics and other indications that perhaps they were on the road to artificial general intelligence, which is the declared intention of OpenAI. So it's been a fantastic and fascinating year in AI. It's getting into our everyday lives. I was doing a guest lecture yesterday with a bunch of students, and I asked how many of you using AI in your studies, and every hand went up. There's absolutely pervasive, all pervasive now. But enough of me. Really keen to hear from our speakers, and it gives me huge pleasure to announce our three speakers with Benita, Oscar, and Carla, and to hand over to. I'm going to pick on Benita first, who is part of the AI Institute and is going to give us her perspective on AI from the financial services and taxation perspective. So Benita, over to you.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody here to take part in this conversation. Happy to share some ideas to make the most of AI in tax administration. So the first point I just want to make about tax administrations is we have all interacted with tax administrations over the years, and the moment we start getting a job, anytime we start to own any assets that need to be reported or filed for. So it's something that the use of AI within tax administration is something that touches on all of our lives. So the first idea is to dream big. We have to begin to imagine the ideal tax administration where taxpayers are confident of compliance and it is easy to be compliant. The tax gap between what administrations expect to collect and what they ended up collecting should be minimized, and the money that we spend towards collecting the tax should also be minimized. But it should be a dream that works for everyone. And we have to consider how it would work for people beyond the problem of the digital divide and problems of how taxpayers are ready to interact with tax administrations. An example in the UK is the Making Tax Digital program. We need to think about balancing the Nolan principles with improved service delivery, facilitating cooperation between taxpayers and the tax administration, and also thinking about upskilling and reskilling the workforce within tax administrations when we start to think about incorporating AI tools within their functions. And also national security concerns about the use of personal data while government customers are relying on private companies to help innovate AI solutions for them. And defining accountability and how that's going to change when AI is being used by tax administrations for us, towards us as taxpayers. Another idea to make the most of AI in tax from a government perspective is to differentiate between the use of AI in decision-making processes that have direct consequences for taxpayers and the use of AI to enhance understanding of economic factors within the given data sets. Many of the problems that I just mentioned about defining accountability, the digital divide, supporting taxpayer cooperation, these are not major problems when using AI to analyze or better understand correlations in a respective data set, because it is then used alongside other types of economic analysis, other methods that have already been used for many years. And it could be used to inform the leadership of the tax administration about the performance of the administration themselves and even policymakers without having a direct impact on the taxpayer. Using AI to help with improving understanding is less risky than in the case of decision making about taxpayers' affairs. And so there might be more safer gains to be made while we're not yet so confident about AI in tax decision making processes. And another way to make the most of AI in tax administration involves clarifying and communicating its implications on power and privacy. How does the change in prerequisites, such as access to vast amounts of information that is linked with individual identities, change the power dynamics between the administration and taxpayers, even if the goal was to use AI to merely improve efficiency? And asking questions like, is information being used for other purposes than it was originally collected for? Or is there a trail of evidence of permission for the information to be used for other purposes, no matter how useful it is in helping administrations carry out their duties effectively? And another way to make the most out of the use of AI within tax administration is to share best practice across the globe. Countries are already trying to work together at a global and even regional levels to share applications, learning experiences from the risks that they've observed when they used AI within administration activities, and sharing strategies to mitigate it. And also sharing best practice about communicating and how to govern the use of AI within tax administration activities, because these are not problems that are limited to any one country. And so there's a lot to be learned in sharing these practices and experiences. And it also provides scope to standardize the use of AI within tax administration. So there are gains to be made while we are still trying to cope with challenges, to make the most of the tools that we have, keeping in mind long-term impacts and without discounting a potential for negative impacts on taxpayers. Thank you, Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you, Benita. I was busily writing down some questions that I'm very interested to ask you, but I remind our audience that this is about their opportunity to ask questions. So go to the Q&A tab, start typing in your questions. If what Benita's just been talking about interests you and you've got some questions about that, put those questions in. We'll come back to them. So next I want to introduce Oscar Mendes, who is head of robotics at the university and has now taken the leap into the commercial world, something I remember very well. So really interested, Oscar, in hearing your perspective on a year in AI and how to best make use of AI going forward.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. So as Andrew was saying, my name is Oscar Mendes. I'm a researcher in computer vision, robotics, and artificial intelligence. I'm currently a machine vision lead at a company called Locus Robotics, and we work on something called warehouse automation or third-party logistics. And I'm also a visiting senior lecturer at the University of Surrey. So I've got a bit of a breadth of experience in both, developing AI, but also, using it in industry. But I wanted to start a little bit with my background. So because I fell in love with computer science when I was 15, and I wrote my first sort of like Hello World program. And I did in college, I took all the programming courses I could. When I came to my degree, I did a very kind of traditional engineering course where I wanted to figure out how machines work, what makes them tick. So I studied everything from sort of like Maxwell's equations and kind of like low-level electronic engineering. And then I was on a path to do a traditional sort of engineering career in telecommunications until I started looking into this problem or this area called computer vision, which is where I did my PhD. And what happened was I joined computer vision at a time when deep learning, what we called back then deep learning, because AI was not, we weren't allowed to use that word, was kind of taking the field by storm. And I made this very deliberate decision during my PhD to not pursue AI as a means, as an end in and of itself. I wanted to use AI to do things and to solve problems. So my PhD was very much in the intersection of computer vision, robotics, and AI. So I took these AI black boxes that people were developing, and I applied them to problems in robotics, and I applied them in ways that were understood by the robotics community and that had well-defined structures and well-solved, understood problems. So as I kind of started developing my research career, I kind of very quickly realized that this is an important area that doesn't really seem to get a lot of attention. And the idea that you can solve everything with this big black box of AI, that you're just going to put stuff in and out's going to come the answer, you don't need to do anything in the middle, was kind of very prevalent about 5 years ago. But at least in my opinion, we're moving more towards an area where we use AI as the tool that it is to solve the problems that we want to solve. And that means that we need to combine it with well-defined, well-understood solutions to problems that already exist in a lot of different domains. The reason I kind of mentioned my background is because in a way I followed a very traditional sort of like path to being an AI guy. I did engineering, I did all of this sort of computer science stuff. And now I'm doing kind of AI development, and I started working on developing my own AI architectures, and I've certainly done all of that. But I've always been very keen about the fact that we cannot ignore domain expertise. And so all of my research and in fact, most of my career has been geared towards this idea that while AI is an extremely powerful tool, it is just a tool. So we shouldn't kind of fall into the trap of thinking that all of this domain expertise that we developed in areas like law and tax and medicine and all of these different domains, that we should just try to replace all of that with AI. And there are certainly, some attitudes to that sense. And I think the reason for that is kind of, it comes from a lot of different areas. So legally and sort of like from a standardization point of view, it's very difficult to take these big black AI boxes and get them certified or get them past some kind of like rigorous testing process, because we've seen things like people jailbreaking ChatGPT. You know, these are advanced systems that are very difficult to test in isolation. So as we move towards this sort of like general adoption of AI, it's going to be more and more important that we use it in really specific way. And I like to call that AI sprinkles. And it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's this idea that like the AI shouldn't be the whole dessert, right? It should just be the thing that fills in the gap, that thing that makes that model that you have that is really good, but has some gaps in areas that are difficult to understand or to model. You can use AI to fill in those gaps. So in a way, AI is a very powerful tool. It is not the end-all solution to all the problems. It should be used in conjunction with what you're doing, with the way that you understand your business, your problems, and it should be something that just helps you achieve the task that you want to achieve. It shouldn't just replace your entire process. So that's my opinion. I think this era of sort of like black box AI is probably not going to last much longer, if not that it's already kind of on its way out. And I think domain expertise and the ability to validate everything that you're doing and then adding AI on top of it just to smooth those gaps is the way that things are going.
Thanks, Oscar. And that's a really great line and really fits with the theme of how to make the best of AI. And to have that perspective, I think is really interesting. So keep reminding our audience, the Q&A tab is open. Please post your questions in there. I don't want to ask the only questions. We've got over 100 people listening in, so please ask your questions as we go through these presentations. So our third speaker, Carla Bonino, really great to hear from you. I'm going to hand over to you, Carla. How should we make the most of AI?
Thank you very much, Andrew, and great to be here with so many interested alumni and beyond, right? So a big background of myself as well, and just to put in line with many of the things we talk already. I'm a social scientist. I'm associate professor at Surrey Business School, and I'm also fellow of the People Center AI Institute. So what I would like to share with you is how I take AI from my own research that combines many years of working on digital innovation and sustainable development, right? So to me, the most peculiar thing of how to think about AI, how to make the most of AI, is to think that we need to understand context. And it's great what you just said, Oscar, about it. And context means, understanding the peculiarities, the problems, the idiosyncrasies, the culture of people. So let me start with some numbers, right? I think it's important to remind ourselves that, even when we are seeing AI everywhere, we still have 2.7 billion people in the world that are not connected to the internet. Right. And so out of the 5.3 billion, we have 8 billion people in the world that are connected. A platform or a giant platform, a social media platform that uses a lot of data and AI to do lots of good things and some other things that have been criticized. That is Facebook, for example, has around 3 billion people. So why this matters? Because you, Andrew, portrayed a very good landscape of what happened in the last, very crucial year, I would say, for AI. So we know that AI is currently hailed, as some other previous technologies were in the past, is hailed as one of the most promising technologies to actually contribute to very important traits of sustainable development. But as you rightly point out, and as we see it in the media every day, there is increased concern on the risk. So why this in perspective? Because a lot of these risks are also bigger when it comes to more vulnerable societies, what we call these days the global south, not just referring to developing countries. We still have 8% of people are not connected on the internet in the UK, right? So you have people that don't have access to basic rights, and still how AI will impact, or the virtues of how AI may make the most, you know, for the benefit of society and people, do matter in the context, their place, and the needs they have. So 2 more pieces of information here, right? Remember also that, as it happens with other technologies, my expertise comes very much from data and digital platforms at the global scale. Today, we're speaking of a world that largely concentrates the investments and the hyperscale data centers in only 2 countries, right? That is the States and China, the United States and China. And when you look at the biggest companies of the world, or the most valuable companies of the world today, the digital platforms, 90% of, you know, their market capitalization also concentrates in those 2 countries. So, right, so why this all matters? Because again, to make the most of AI, we still require big efforts to deal with inclusion, who's excluded, and actually these ideas of concentration. We have that very few companies actually concentrate the power of AI, of data, and all the things related to that. So what I would like to share with you today is coming from my own experience in working with communities and in communities in the Global South, of something that to me is a very great examples of many of these indigenous innovations, very much of what Oscar said before, right? And also Benita, you don't notice in the context we're living, that how AI can be used to actually tackle a very specific problem. So this is a great initiative called iMurai, that what it does is an open source software that powers itself on AI to open up criminal rulings. For what purpose? To combat gender-based violence. And this matters because in Latin America, only in the last year, it's more or less around 4,000 women that were victims of feminicide. This means that 12 die per day on average, like 1 hour, I mean, 1 woman every 2 hours. So why a software like this matters? And again, Andrew, you mentioned $100 million or euros in an investment. This was done with very, you know, almost, you know, very little money, conducted by a great civil society organization called Dr Género, and in partnership with the court in Buenos Aires, the criminal court number 10, what they did was, okay, let's use the power of large language models to anonymize data of these court rulings, but to be very aware of the responsible innovation that this matters. You don't want to feed, you know, these big platform giants with all this personal data of people that were either the perpetrators of the victims. So they built this powerful, I mean, very powerful, very low cost, you know, initiative to actually tackle a very specific problem. And they're rolling it out, but this is not just how AI can help. It also requires, you know, a very mindful set of judges that are very inclined to work on open justice and to safeguard, you know, the vulnerabilities of these people. So again, you could have said, okay, but we have so many proprietary software or even, you know, big tech softwares that could anonymize all this data now. So taking in consideration the context and why this private or personal data is so important meant that it took the long road to build something on, you know, very local service in order to be very responsible AI and responsible innovation driven. So this is just one of the cases that I've been working in the past few years that really uses AI and takes, you know, a stance from indigenous innovation to actually try to solve problems for very local and important, you know, problems in given settings. So just to wrap up, what it takes to take the most of AI, Of course, we don't want to portray just a dark side or a negative picture, but I think a much better understanding of the problems, of the context, that this is not something that only developers or big techs are going to solve, rather the contrary. It takes the involvement of so many stakeholders, precisely as some of the work we do in the people I say, people center AI Institute at Surrey. It takes a truly multidisciplinary approach and effort to really think of the future of AI and what will afford for the benefit of everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carla. Some really powerful points there, and an interesting juxtaposition about with what we've heard from Benita and Oscar too. And we're starting to get the questions pouring in. I keep reminding people, go to the Q&A tab and start putting your questions in. So now's the session. We'll go to open mic. So I encourage the four of us to put our mics on open so we can chat about some of the questions in. The first question, there's several questions coming in about tax, Benita, you'll be pleased to know, ranging from I'm doing my tax return this afternoon, how can AI help me, through to some of the more strategic questions about, for example, the sensitivity of personal information. So some organizations are just not allowed to use, to share those kind of personal bits of information on systems such as ChatGPT, for example. And so asking the question how they can access AI without compromising those data permissions, if you like. So let's start off on the tax one, and I will bend it towards Carla, because actually it raises the question, or links in my mind to one of the points you were making, which is about inclusion and people having access. We don't want AI to be the tax advisor for the people, only for the people who can afford it. The point is, how do we all benefit from AI-enabled tax decision-making, AI-enabled advice? So, Benita, what are your thoughts on those questions, and can you help? I think it was Bibi who's doing her tax return this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and Bibi, for the question and all the other questions that have come through. So yes, there are two ways of thinking about how AI can be used to enhance compliance. There have been examples, especially most of these examples come from the US, but there have been examples of AI tools that taxpayers can use to figure out what is the best legal way to minimize their tax liability. And these kinds of models are useful and functional in a rules-based system where tax rules are more specific. But when you look at somewhere like the UK and other countries, you have a principles-based system. So it's not just about reading and going with the letter of the law about what is allowed, what is not allowed, and how you end up calculating your final tax liability. So we can imagine why it's more useful in rules-based systems. But from a taxpayer perspective, there have been so many examples of models that people can use to see if there are opportunities for them to legally pay the right amount of tax. And I would say some of these models are basically helping people out with, because a single taxpayer might not know every part of your tax law. And maybe such models are just filling that gap where it helps people build awareness about what are their options, what's available, and how they should comply. So it's not necessarily negative. From the other side, from the administration perspective, we can use things like, and there have been prior examples about the use of chatbots and using features to nudge taxpayers when they're filling their forms online, and maybe even filling some of the parts of your form for you, so that it's easier for the taxpayer to comply, so that you have lower chances of making errors or being aware of errors while you're completing your tax filing process. So that's the other, if you're taking a government perspective, supporting taxpayers to be more compliant, complete filings more accurately, and so on, increasing their confidence, giving them more certainty about whether what they've reported and how they have complied is correct. So yes, those are two sides. And the other question you mentioned, Andrew, was about if you think about how you can use AI within tax administration to do things like risk assessment. So when we think about the privacy challenge, as a taxpayer at this point, I personally, at least, I'm not aware of what is all of the information that the tax administration holds about me from different resources. And in some countries, information is allowed to and may be shared between different departments within the government, which is helping the tax administration do better risk assessments. And those are the kind of situations where we start asking questions about, okay, maybe I've completed my vehicle's registration. Does the tax administration have that information about my ownership of my vehicle from me or from information shared from a different department within the government, even if it is to help make the tax administration more effective at their own jobs? So that's the kind of privacy question that comes up, is whether we are aware, and it might be completely fine, but do we even have the opportunity to make corrections if such information is wrong or it needs to be updated? How does that work? So involving us in that process is, I think, very important if we're going to do things that way moving forward.
Thanks, Manita. So, Carla, how do we make that accessible to everyone? How do we overcome some of the problems associated with things like bias and so forth?
So yeah, I was looking also at great Q&A, also related questions. The issues of investing in infrastructure skills are of course more important than ever, right? So we can't think that because you're sitting in a certain location, then everyone has access. These were, conversations we had in digital transformation or digital government and making all this digital by default. You're always excluding people. So it's a matter of always, having that, perspective in mind. I think a related question that happened there is that we have to understand that the industry is very aware of the problems of algorithmic bias. You mentioned that really well, Andrew, the letter that was signed by, the paper that was put together earlier this year, saying, hey, we have to stop this. We need to understand better, how this may create harms. So we know that this can be done for very good purposes, but this is advancing really fast, and harms are not only, to vulnerable people, but, more in general, and also this fear of humans losing control of, autonomous systems. So some of you, I think, Stanley asked, okay, would, companies benefit from having more social scientists? I mean, a lot of the big techs definitely, and the investments that were mentioned before have very multidisciplinary teams. And as I said, my own experience, speaking on a, invited roundtable at one of the big techs, Amazon Web Services, a couple of months ago, was that there is a big awareness. The problem is that in this world of ethics, by the way, there are very important regulations being crafted and being, in the push, whether including the UK, but also European Union. You mentioned the executive order in the States. We have very different frameworks. So one of the common problems that people in the industry face is like, how do I convince my C-level of using this standard for algorithmic bias versus this other? And we have great advancements, including, the transparency, the algorithmic transparency standard released by the UK. But in a nutshell, how do we make this more inclusive, accessible? Well, we have to enable these conversations. And I think we are doing it. The problem is that a lot of these technologies move faster. There is so much money going, I mean, in the pot, that just by drafting and passing regulation, we're not going to solve, more, difficult problems. So.
Thanks. We're getting some fantastic questions coming in a torrent now, so we've got some questions to answer, and I want to come on to the one around skills and career opportunities, and I'll come to you first, Oscar, on that. But just before I do that, there is a question in there from Kieran, who's being quite honest about this. What are the real benefits of AI other than sort of ChatGPT? And I think that's an opportunity to stand back and say, look, AI is just the latest term of art for what is fundamentally, and Oscar will tell me off about this, if you think that we've spent the last 30, 40 years, 50 years using computing to digitize all sorts of different aspects of our life, we've always told the computer what to do. The paradigm shift now is that we train a computer what to do instead of telling it what to do. And that allows you to solve a whole bunch of problems that previously up until now, we just haven't been able to write the rules or write the instructions that enable the computer to solve something. It can figure it out for itself. And that's a huge paradigm shift. ChatGPT, large language models, are just one instance of that. We use AI on our phones, so our photographs are recognized. We use AI on search, on Google search. 70,000 searches every second go through Google. That's AI enabled. Facebook takes off something like 100 million offensive images from its social media feeds every year. That's all done with AI, because there's no way a human being could do that or necessarily should do that. Autonomous driving is on the horizon. We can get to level 2, level 3, and so on. AI is very much already part of the weapon weave of our modern lives, and this is just, a year in AI has accelerated, put it into the hands where people are playing with it in a sense that almost the AI to date has been invisible. Oscar, give me your perspective on that, and then start on the, what are the skills, what are the opportunities for people to use AI? You don't have to be a coder, you don't have to be the sort of the mathematician, the computer science to really take advantage of the AI revolution. And what you're doing now is kind of fascinating. So give us some perspectives on those things.
Yeah, I think you touch on a really important aspect there. And the idea that if you have a smartphone or if you exist in the digital world, you use AI every day, probably every hour. There are algorithms there that are based on fundamental AI technology, or what we call, I'm going to say deep learning instead of AI to be a bit more specific. But anything from your Google searches, your YouTube recommendations, what Netflix film decides to put in front of you when you sit on Friday night, all of that is driven by fundamentally sort of like deep learning AI technologies. So ChatGPT is kind of the tip of the iceberg in a sense. It's what made AI accessible or understandable to most people, but it's certainly not the end all. And I think this is something that I think is quite important. This idea that AI is a monolith, like this kind of like entity, and if you sort of said like, oh, computers are moving really fast, like people don't understand computers. Well, which computers? Do you mean the ones that are on cars? Do you mean mobile phones? Do you mean like embedded software? Which aspect of computing are you talking about? And we need to start talking about AI in the same way. AI is moving quickly. It doesn't really mean anything. Which part of AI? What are you interested in? Are you interested in creative technologies? Okay, there's a spectrum of AI technologies that would help you if you became acquainted with the kind of image processing that you can do on static images. There's a lot of that you can do there, but you don't need to go into 3D, like modeling the 3D world. You can just look at things like removing people from pictures that you don't want there, or touching up skin tones and that sort of thing. And you don't need to understand or develop AI technologies to understand what the powers and limitations are and use them in software like Photoshop or something similar that has those capabilities. So I think what opportunities are there needs to be discussed in the context of what are you interested in? What field do you want to go in? Because that's going to dictate what kind of AI technologies you should be investigating. And I think, so I mentioned that I kind of took a very traditional path to AI, and I'm not sure if I made the point clear that like it's not the only way to work in AI. There is a lot of need for domain experts to enter the conversation and to tell us, you know, there's this part of the problem that we already understand and we can solve like with huge amounts of accuracy, but there are these parts of the problem where we're struggling. So so how can AI help me bridge that little gap? So you don't have to be a mathematician, you don't have to be an expert. What you do have to do is understand the problem, understand what you want to work in, what areas you're interested in, understand that domain well, and have a nuanced understanding of what AI can do and what it can't do, rather than kind of this idea that we all need to be developing AI to be relevant in the workforce, which I don't think is the case.
Thanks, Oscar. And Carla, Benita, I mean, what made you interested in AI? You know, as a social scientist, as a finance specialist, doing in the theoretical sides of tax systems, what drew you into AI? Perhaps as another way of taking a line on that question, Carla.
Great, thank you, Andrew. For me, it was a very obvious continuation of my career. The research question that drives my work is, put it simply, is how new technologies can make a better world for billions, right, or millions. And so I come from a background that I always study, you know, first, you know, mobile phones and digital divide, and then how digital technologies could be used in governments to deliver better public services. Then I work a lot with open data because that was an input to also help in transparency and innovation, and then moving into the role of digital platforms for development. That is, you know, what do these big giants mean for the life of billions? And I think, as you rightly point out, Oscar, you know, I also had to train myself to now speak more adequately of what AI is, because in every part you go, it's like any algorithm is AI. No, well, we're speaking about deep learning and machine learning. So a lot of what we see in ChatGPT or large language models are applications of that specific emphasis. For me, it was a very obvious path, simply because all my work in data is so relevant to actually understand, okay, the decisions or this new, you know, generative path that we see large language models are all based on data. So if we don't understand the data device, the data governance models, right, well, good luck with the outcomes or outputs that we're going to get from AI. For me, it's absolutely, you know, crucial to be in this space right now when you study, you know, the connection of digital technologies and development.
Thanks, Carla. Benita, what got you into AI?
So you're right, Andrew. I've been working from a theoretical perspective, looking at improving tax policy to tax international business activity. But before that, by training, I'm an accountant. So I am subscribed to the news items. So I keep getting these emails from my professional accounting body. Over the last couple of years in the UK, the example I can share is for Making Tax Digital. And there was a lot of discussion about bringing stakeholder views in to make decisions about how to shape the Making Tax Digital program within the UK. And as you keep going through these news items that come over every week or every 2 weeks, I started to see that there's a sudden sense of panic among small and medium business enterprises or single owner business structures about making tax digital. And I thought right away that I've been working on improving policy, going back to that point about that Dr. Benina just made about regulation is not enough. So we're working on improving policy, making taxation effective. And on the other end, when we are looking at making it easier for taxpayers, there's a panic on the other side, and that is not the way in which we should make collecting taxes, easy and efficient, because the whole idea is that collecting taxes and paying taxes is made as easy as possible and costs as little as possible. And that is what drew my attention to working on the problem of considering problems of inclusivity, considering problems of small, medium enterprise challenges with regards to catching up with something like making tax digital in the UK. And that reminds me of a sort of statistic I'd come across when Dr. Bonina was talking about the digital divide and inclusivity. It's about, I think, 19% of small and medium business enterprises who are not actually already set up with digital accessibility in order to comply with something like making tax digital. And those are big problems because we're trying to make collecting tax and paying tax as easy as possible and less costly. But all of these businesses out there, mainly small and medium enterprises, they don't have the resources or the capability to get ready for something like this in the first place. And then as you go along the value chain, you see how AI is being used within tax administrations. So AI is not just limited to sort of the tax administration's activity. There are uses and benefits that go along that value chain all the way through to collecting the tax and checking if that's correct. So looking at how AI can be used within tax administration to identify fraudulent activity. So it's been used in Poland to identify VAT carousel frauds. It's been used in Australia to recognize, to match transactions, to identify abnormal transactions. And it's also been used in Australia to recognize director fraud. So it's been used in many different ways to solve very specific different problems. So linking back to what Oscar was saying, you do need domain expertise, and doesn't mean that AI is going to take over jobs of people who work within tax administrations, because to understand the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve, what kind of fraudulent activity we're trying to recognize, understanding whether the outputs or anomalies make sense, what is the source of this kind of a correlation between different data points, all of that requires domain expertise, and all of that requires working across disciplines. So these are kind of areas that drew me into looking at how AI is used within tax.
Thanks, Benita. Really fascinating. We're nearly at the top of the hour, and we've got some fabulous questions coming in, which we just don't have time to address. In fact, many of the questions are, we would happily discuss for the entirety of the afternoon. We've got questions about AI risk, which is a big topic, lots of different opinions on that. We've got questions on bias, on equitable outcomes. We've got questions on how the government keep up with regulating AI. At the moment, it's largely unregulated, and lots of interesting and political interest in that. We've got questions about the kind of skills. So do we need more social scientists? And I would argue, other disciplines as well. That's certainly the foundation of the AI Institute, is to be truly multidisciplinary, because we recognize that AI needs that domain knowledge and needs the application knowledge. We've got questions about explainability, how you audit, how you apply AI in safety critical software, for example, safety critical systems. We've got AI in translation, in telecoms and so on. All of these fabulous subjects, much bigger than we've got time to discuss now. I'm going to just ask one very quick question and a sort of 30-second answer from each of you, if you may. If we are sitting here in 5 years' time, what would you say is likely to be the biggest impact of AI? Oscar, I'll go with you first. Come on, you keep us fed with your robotics and warehousing. So have a go.
Biggest impact of AI. I think there's going to be a transition towards AI that can impact the physical world in the next 5 years. I think that's certainly coming. I mean, we're already doing a lot of that work at Locus, where I work, where we're using AI technology to impact the way that the world works in the physical sense. And to touch on some of the questions about skill set, I think one of the things that is going to do is it's going to change the way that we work. It won't necessarily result in like the catastrophic mass firings that people are talking about, but one thing I will say is that AI is notoriously overconfident in its own predictions. So developing that analytical critical thinking skill of saying like, this looks good, this is a good answer, this is a bad answer, we're going to change the way that we work from producing the thing to critiquing the thing. And in a very optimistic sense, I hope that enables us to develop more critical thinking skills as we kind of evolve into this AI age.
Great answer, Oscar. Embodied AI, here we come. 30-second answers, please. Carla, Benita. Can I go to you, Carla, first?
So in the next 5 years, biggest impact I'd like to see is the more humane, people-centered AI. I think we are in a tipping point. Definitely the predictions suggest the autonomous systems are going to take over. We're not going to stop that. But what we can do, and I hope to see that, is to feed these machines with the better of our societies and not the bad.
Fantastic, and a great plug for the Institute too. Benita.
Yes, I think we're already on the trajectory for reducing compliance costs and improving efficiency. So I think moving forward, I would dream to see and work on more of the transparency issues, improving the cooperation between the taxpayer and the tax administration, improving the taxpayer's confidence in what we're already on the trajectory for. And so it might take less than 5 minutes to complete your tax return, but what's the question about how much do you trust all of the work that's going behind, maybe filling your tax return for you before you need to click a submit button. So I think working on trust, transparency that improves trust is what should improve and can improve the next 5 years.
Fantastic. And we are recording this, so we'll come back to it in 5 years' time and check whether we're on top of it. My own guess is that AI is going to have a huge impact, strangely enough, on education, the way we learn and what we learn and the way we teach. And I think that will have a profound impact on society and the way that we run careers and so on. Thank you enormously for the audience joining us. I hope it's been an interesting session. Thank you to our speakers today. I'd love to be able to hear the applause from the audience. You've asked some fantastic questions. If you really want to pursue those questions, reach out to us at the AI Institute at the University of Surrey. You can find our details online. And please join us for the next of these, how to make the most of a particular subject, which will be in the new year. So fantastic 23. Have a good Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you very much.